Sky over Kimball County is the color of a fresh bruise. Silas Yarnell stands in his sorghum field with a stopwatch in one hand and a rope in the other. 40 feet away, a length of culvert pipe sticks up from a steel drum like a cannon aimed at heaven. He lights a fuse. A concussion rolls across the flatland, flat and hard, like a door slamming inside the clouds. Birds scatter off the fence line. Silas doesn't flinch. He writes a number in a notebook already swollen with rain and repetition. His neighbors call it foolishness dressed up as farming. Some slow their trucks on the county road just to watch, shaking their heads before they drive on. A grown man, shooting noise at storm clouds like his grandfather's grandfather might have, back before anybody understood weather at all. Behind him, 40 acres of sorghum sway green and low, planted in soil that has failed him for 3 straight seasons. His barn roof is patched with the same tin twice. His truck runs on a battery held together with a bread tie. And still, every evening, he walks that field with his cannons like a man tending something sacred. Nobody in Dix, Nebraska, could say for certain what Silas Yarnell was actually trying to save: his crop, his land, or something else entirely that he had stopped talking about out loud. If a story like this one does you any good today, consider sticking around and pressing that subscribe button. It costs nothing, and it helps this channel keep finding folks like Silas. And while you're here, drop a comment and let me know what part of the country you're watching from tonight. I always like picturing where these stories land. Kimball County sits up in the Nebraska Panhandle, where the land runs flat and dry, and the wind never really stops introducing itself. The town of Dix has one stoplight, one diner, and a grain elevator that's been repainted so many times nobody remembers its original color. Farmers there grow wheat, corn when the water allows it, and increasingly sorghum, a crop tough enough to survive drought but never tough enough, it seemed, to survive Kimball County hail. 3 years running, storms had rolled through in July and August and stripped fields bare in under 10 minutes, leaving stalks looking like they'd been fed through a wood chipper. Silas Yarnell had inherited his father's farm and along with it his father's debts. Kimball County Farmers and Merchants Bank held the note, and Bertram Slocum, the branch manager, had renewed it every spring with the same tired sigh, the same tap of his pen against the desk. "This is the last year I can carry you on faith, Mr. Yarnell," he'd said more than once, like a man reciting scripture he no longer believed in. Silas's wife, Adelia, kept the household books in a cigar box, and some winters, the numbers in that box did not leave room for new boots for their son. Their boy, Amos, was 13 and old enough to notice things his parents tried to hide. He noticed that supper got thinner toward the end of each month. He noticed his mother stopped buying the good coffee and switched to the tin with the rooster on it. And he noticed that his father, a man who rarely spoke more than he had to, had started talking to himself out in the field at dusk, sketching shapes in a notebook by the light of a lantern hung off a fence post, muttering about barometric pressure like it was a language he was only just learning to speak. Adelia remembered the August storm 3 years back, clearest of all, hail the size of walnuts drumming the tin roof, so hard she thought the house itself might come apart. She'd stood at the window holding Amos against her hip, watching their entire wheat crop flatten in under a quarter hour. Silas hadn't said a word that night. He'd only walked out into the wreckage afterward barefoot and stood there a long while, looking up at a sky gone calm and blue again, as if it hadn't just ruined him. Purnell Fassett farmed the section next door and had known Silas since grade school. He was the kind of man who said what everybody else was thinking, whether they wanted to hear it or not. "Silas," he said one evening, leaning on the fence while Silas welded a bracket onto another length of pipe, sparks flying orange against the dusk, "you're gonna blow your own hand off before you ever stop a hailstone." Silas didn't look up. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I finally figure out the timing." Purnell shook his head and walked off, muttering that grief did strange things to a sensible man. What Purnell didn't know, what nobody knew, because Silas hadn't told a soul, was that the concussion cannons were only half of it. Late at night, after Adelia and Amos had gone to bed, Silas drove into the far corner of his land where an old irrigation ditch ran dry. And there, hidden from the road by a stand of dead cottonwoods, he had begun stringing something else entirely. Steel pipe frames, salvaged from a collapsed grain bin 2 counties over, rigged 12 feet high and strung tight with wire mesh netting bought a roll at a time, whenever the farm could spare $40. He had read about hail netting in an agricultural bulletin from New Zealand of all places, mailed to him by a cousin who'd emigrated there for orchard work. Fruit growers used it over their trees. Nobody, as far as Silas could find, had ever tried it over a sorghum field in the Nebraska panhandle, and there was a reason for that. It was slow, back-breaking, expensive work, and it covered maybe 2 acres for every week of labor. He had 40 acres under contract. He had one growing season, and he had, tucked in his coat pocket, a letter from the Panhandle Seed Growers Cooperative that he had not yet shown his wife. The letter named a woman, Delphia Ransom, a field agent who had toured his farm the previous fall and offered him something no one else had, a contract to grow certified hybrid sorghum seed at nearly triple the going rate, provided he could deliver an undamaged, disease-free crop by the 1st of October. It was the kind of contract that could clear his note in a single season. It was also the kind of contract that came due whether the sky cooperated or not, and the sky over Kimball County had not cooperated with Silas Yarnell in longer than anyone could remember. So he built cannons for the sudden, violent bursts, netting for the field's most exposed, most vulnerable rows nearest the ditch. He measured wind patterns off an old barometer his father had left behind. He tracked which corners of the farm caught hail worst, year over year, going back through his father's ledgers by lantern light. Adelia watched all of it in silence for a long while, until one evening she finally asked him straight out whether he understood what would happen if the netting failed and the cannons didn't work and the contract fell through anyway. "Then we lose it the way we were already going to lose it," Silas said. "Only slower." In late June, the setback came. A sudden squall line, no warning, no watch issued, dropped marble-sized hail across the western half of the county before dawn. It caught Silas's newest cannon mid-assembly, the drum unsecured, and the storm's own wind toppled it into the ditch, bending the culvert pipe past any hope of repair. Worse, it shredded a full acre of netting he had strung only 2 weeks before, tearing the mesh loose from 3 of the pipe frames like paper. He walked out that morning to find his best corner of the field standing in ribbons, the same as it always had. Delphia Ransom drove out that same week to inspect the damage, her boots sinking in the mud between rows. She didn't raise her voice, but her disappointment carried anyway. "I have 6 other growers who take this contract without blinking, Mr. Yarnell," she said, flipping through her clipboard. "I need to see progress, not experiments." Adelia stood at the edge of the field with her arms crossed, saying nothing, though the look on her face asked the same question Purnell had asked weeks before. That night, Silas sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to sleep, staring at the ruined section on his hand-drawn map of the farm. He nearly quit. He told himself later that he came within an hour of it, sitting there with the cigar box of household money open in front of him, thinking of 100 easier ways to lose the farm than this one. But near midnight, Amos came down for water and found his father still at the table. The boy didn't ask what was wrong. He only said, "Grandpa's ledger says the west corner always gets hit worst. Maybe rebuild there first, not last." Silas looked at his son a long moment, then closed the cigar box and reached instead for his father's old ledger. By August, an old windmill tower on a neighboring section, condemned and sold for scrap, gave Silas the steel he needed to finish the frames. He worked through the worst heat of the summer, hands blistered, shirt soaked through by 9 in the morning, restringing net over the west corner first, exactly as Amos had suggested. Purnell still shook his head when he drove past, though he'd stopped saying much of anything by then. Even mockery, it turned out, got tired eventually. By the middle of September, all 40 acres stood under wire mesh or within reach of a cannon, and the crop beneath it, All had grown taller and greener than any Yarnell field in a decade. The auction notice arrived from Kimball County Farmers and Merchants Bank on September the 20th. Bertram Slocum had signed it himself. If the note wasn't satisfied by October the 3rd, the farm would go to the courthouse steps. The seed cooperative's harvest deadline was October the 1st. 2 days of margin, in a county where storms didn't ask permission and didn't check calendars. Adelia read the notice twice at the kitchen table, then folded it and set it beneath the sugar bowl, where she wouldn't have to look at it every time she passed. Nobody said the word if. Everybody was thinking it. The storm came on the night of September the 28th, without a watch or a warning, the way the worst ones in Kimball County always seemed to. It rolled in black and low around 10 at night, and by 11, hail the size of golf balls was falling across 3 counties, driven sideways by wind that bent the old cottonwoods nearly flat. Silas stood at his window in the dark, watching lightning flash white across a sky he had spent 2 years trying to outthink, and for the first time since spring, he did not go outside. There was nothing left to do but wait. Purnell Fassett drove the county road at first light, the way he did most mornings, and what he saw stopped his truck cold in the middle of the lane. Every field on either side of the road lay flattened, corn stripped to bare stalks, wheat beaten into the mud. A neighbor's greenhouse caved in like a crushed can. And then, past the dead cottonwoods, Silas Yarnell's 40 acres stood green and whole and upright, wire netting glinting with melting ice, sorghum heads heavy and untouched, as if the storm had simply stepped around it on its way through. Word reached the diner in Dick's before most folks had finished their coffee. By mid-morning, trucks lined the county road 2 deep, farmers standing at the fence with their hats pushed back, staring at a field that made no sense against the ruins surrounding it on every side. Delphia Ransom arrived by noon with a state agronomist in tow, both of them walking the rows slowly, running sorghum heads through their fingers, checking the netting overhead like they were trying to catch it in some trick of the light. Bertram Slocum came last of all, standing at the edge of the ditch in his good shoes, saying nothing, looking at the one field in Kimball County the storm had somehow spared. Silas delivered his harvest to the cooperative on the last day of September, a full crop, certified and undamaged, the only one of its kind for 80 miles. The check that followed cleared the note at Kimball County Farmers and Merchants Bank 3 days before the auction was set to run, with enough left over to replace the tin roof and buy Amos his boots before the snow came. Bertram Slocum processed the payment himself and did not meet Silas's eyes while he did it. The seed contract with Delphia Ransom's cooperative renewed the following spring, and the one after that, until Silas's netted acres had grown into 100, then 200, supplying certified sorghum seed to growers clear across 3 states. 10 years on, when the bank consolidated its rural branches and put the old Dick's building up for sale, it was Silas Yarnell who bought it, not out of spite, he always said, but because a cooperative that size needed an office, and the old branch had good bones and a working vault, and there was something fitting, if you thought about it, in filling a bank's empty safe with seed instead of paper. These days, folks in Kimball County still point out the netted fields to newcomers driving through, and somebody always tells the story of the storm that skipped one farm and no other. Silas doesn't correct them when they call it luck. He just looks out toward that west corner, where his father's ledger once marked the worst ground on the place, and says the same thing every time. The storm didn't skip his field at all. It simply found nothing there worth taking.